Well, first of all, I want to tell you that I'm following you for a while, like a couple of years at least. And massive shout out to you for the content that you've created in YouTube and on X. Also, you helped me personally a lot with the new CSS techniques. I'm a huge fan of CSS, so it was for me like your channel is like top one to
Thank you so
over
much.
go there, watch something new that's happening because like for now this past 2 3 years css is growing very rapidly and there's so many stuff that you can do with css that you will never imagine before. And I was like, okay, first things first, let's go see what Kevin did for this one. So I take a look at your website. You mentioned that your early days creating web pages back in high school, experimenting with Photoshop and HTML tables. Can you take us back to that time? Tell me a bit more about how you started your journey into web industry.
Yeah, it was a bit of I'm the type of person who doesn't know. Well, when I was younger, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but just with anything I do, I tend to like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to learn a lot about it, and then I get that's cool. I'm going to find something else now. I get bored of it, and that was sort of my early days as well. So while I did play around with creating websites and stuff. It was just anytime I had an idea for something, I'd sort of throw something together. It was just for fun on the side, and it was sort of on and off again. And then through school, I never studied for web design. I did film. At one point, I was in sciences. I have a bachelor's in urban planning, and then I ended up getting a vocational degree in design, and I was working as a designer. And then from being there, I was doing some freelance work. A lot of the freelance stuff I was doing was UI design things. And then I was like, well, if they're paying me to design it, maybe they'll also pay me once they approve the design. I can make more money by building the website after. And then so I got a few contracts doing that as well. And that was the entry from going like as a hobby project into like, oh, I can actually make money off of this.
Okay. How long are you in this journey? Like decade, if I
That's a good.
remember right, right?
Yeah, so it's been a long time now. I started. I'm trying to think. I started the YouTube channel 8 years ago.
Okay.
I taught. I started teaching 3 years before that in a classroom. So plus that's 8, 9, 10, 11. It's at least 15 years ago when I was starting to
Wow.
play around with things like that.
Wow. That's a huge one. Many creatives dabble in design that often hesitate to turn it into career. For you, for my understanding, especially with when freelancing on the side, what inspired you to shift like from UI design to also web development? Is it only money perspective, or you just like to dig into the coding phase also?
Yeah, part of it was definitely I enjoyed doing it. I thought it was fun. So I wanted, and it being something that I could potentially make money for was definitely a motivation at the time. But what I ended up realizing is that I preferred that than the design side. I wasn't a great designer. I mean, I can make things look not bad, but I'm not very good at making them look really good. But the coding side of things for me was much more interesting, and I enjoyed that a lot more. And because I think I had that base in design and just thinking that way and making designs, the CSS side for me was always the most fun of the whole project. So
Yeah. By the way, I didn't found your LinkedIn profile. I saw the X. I always follow you on X and follow on YouTube, but never got you in on LinkedIn. Why is that?
I ended up hibernating my LinkedIn account um, a number of years ago. I just I only have so much to put towards
Work.
social media. Yeah, and once I stopped actively looking for positions and other stuff, I was like, I don't really need the LinkedIn. Most of what I was getting from it was just recruiters, not for things that I was interested in,
Yeah.
just randomly DMing, which I think a lot of people get. And since
Yeah.
I just didn't feel I needed it anymore.
Yeah. Right now, LinkedIn became another type of social media also.
Yeah.
They're like It's an X, but more like in a professional way. How
Yeah,
strange
I
it
know a
may
lot of people.
sound.
No, I know a lot of people who even moved off of X onto that as sort of people were leaving, and then
Yeah.
I keep seeing and hearing how it's like it's a completely different social media space now than when I left it. Um, but yeah, I only have so much bandwidth for social media. So even though I mean that's what I do technically is make social content, but for now at least, I'm gonna stay off of X. Sorry, LinkedIn.
How did teaching influence your understanding of CSS and web development? Because yeah, of course,
Yeah,
like when you teach something, you started to understand it a bit more in depth way. Let's say it this way.
yeah. So the one thing I tell people a lot is that if you want to learn something really well, to try teaching it in one way or another, whether that's just like writing blog posts about what you're learning, anything whatsoever. And the reason I say that is because of how much I've learned by teaching. When the very first time when I was teaching something in the classroom, and you think it's a subject you know well enough, like I've made websites, I can teach someone how to do this, and then you're trying to explain it, even if you've planned out, like you plan a lesson, you do everything, and then you're up there trying to explain something, or somebody, usually you're okay for the lesson that you've planned until somebody asks a question, and then you just have no idea, uh just because you don't understand it in depth enough. And so teaching forced me to learn a lot more about how it all works. And now, especially when I'm creating new content or I'm creating lessons for a course or whatever it is, just I end up doing so much more research and so much more understanding of what's going on. But beyond that, just explaining things out loud, the value in doing that, for whatever reason, it's completely different. And anyone I know who's taught has had a similar experience where it's just by vocalizing things or writing things down to explain them, that all of a sudden it makes other stuff make more sense. And you're writing things down or explaining things you already know, so you think that, like, why would that help? But it really does. It can make new connections that you hadn't thought of. I guess you're just using a different part of your brain probably when you're in that side of things. And it's, yeah, teaching is definitely the best way to get to know something really in depth.
Agree with you. But I have one. Maybe it's a bit strange question, but it's very kind of good one, I think. So when people started to learn engineering, most of the time, like CSS is not first choice, right? I don't know where are you from, by the way.
I'm in Canada.
You're in Canada. Perfect. I'm in Armenia right now. I'm living either here or in Dubai. In this part of world, like CSS is misunderstood and misused most of the time. No one gives anything about CSS. Like when you go to do an interviews in any
Hmm.
engineering companies, they might ask you at maximum like 3 4 questions: how to align an element in window, how to put their a font size, or how to like position something by using transform, and that's it. um, so my first question is like, yes, CSS is the essential part of it when you easily jump from doing the design to CSS. But what actually motivates you to start teaching it in the first place? To make it more
Yeah.
popular, or is it something for you also, or in Canada also, that people don't understand it, and it's misunderstood and misused, so that's why you decided to create a channel and start like preaching it, evangelize it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. First of all, I think it's a global thing. The misunderstandings and underappreciation of CSS. I think it's everywhere. When I started the channel, the motivations were definitely different than they are now. I started it as more of a hobby project for myself, just to, as I said, I like starting new things and working on stuff and trying it. So, hey, a YouTube channel, I can talk about things that I know. And at the time, I was teaching in the classroom, and I was doing a lot of like introduction to HTML and CSS. So, like the most advanced stuff we were doing was not like it was really, really basic. So it was kind of boring after a few years of doing that. And I wanted to make sure that I had an excuse to work on things, even if they're small tutorials or whatever it is, but just an excuse to like continue doing stuff that's a little bit more than what I was doing in the classroom. And part of it was just to like see, see what doing a website or a YouTube channel was all about as well. Now my motivation is definitely switched to trying to help people appreciate and enjoy CSS. Um, because I never thought about, oh, this is what my channel is going to become. It was really just a personal thing for me to have fun creating stuff and an excuse to make different things and talk about them. And then once I realized, yeah, and at that stage, I don't think I realized the how misunderstood and misused CSS was and the reputation it had as much as I do now. And so the more I started realizing that and seeing that people really get frustrated with CSS, and a lot of the frustrations, I was like, oh well, no, you hear CSS is counterintuitive and or this is stupid and like all these things, and it's like if you put it in the context of how you're approaching it, yeah, but there's a reason it does that, and if you understand that like from the more fundamental levels of just how the language works, a lot of these things actually start making sense. So once I started realizing that people were so frustrated with it, that's where I was like, no, I think I can do more with this channel and actually explain all of the things I'm learning about it at a fundamental level as much as possible through teaching it, to get people that understanding. And I think one of the reasons too, I mean, just talking about there how in interviews and stuff, you might get a couple questions on it, and I hear stories like that all the time. And I actually talked to some people who do interviews and got questions they ask, and I'm like, I can't understand. Like, there's no point in even asking those questions, right? Like, they're so basic that like anyway, that always surprises me. But I think a lot of it comes from CSS being a declarative language. So when people that are coming from a computer science background or from the real programming languages, they see it as a really simple language because you say color blue and the thing changes to blue, or you say
Yeah.
background purple and you have a purple background, and it's really easy. And the thing is, then all of a sudden it's not so easy because there's a lot of complex stuff that you have to do with simple declarative rules. And there's a lot of, there's the layering that goes on top because you do a display flex that's simple, but then all of a sudden there's 20 new things that you can do with extra levers and everything, and new values and understanding the relationship between everything. So yeah, that's
And how
hopefully
you
what I'm
can
helping
like
people get past.
optimize, how you can optimize even the web page by just changing the CSS part. Like for example, the
Yeah.
wheel change, which is
Oh yes.
for
Yep.
animations. It's a super cool thing, and not a lot of people don't know about it because they don't
Hmm.
care. Right? Okay, yeah, color blue, display flex, align item center, justify content space between, voila, that's it. If we need something
Yeah.
else, then we will use Bootstrap or Material UI. And it goes another layer of misunderstanding also, right?
Yep.
What are the most common issues that you faced while working with the clients? With already like when you're outstaffing or joining to the project where there is already some source of code that has already been written and you need to continue. What are the most common issues that you, as a professional, as a CSS evangelist, also noticing looking at other people codes?
Yeah, there's a couple of common themes that usually come up. One of them is if it's part of it can just be if it's like a lot of legacy code where you can tell there was like rollover of employees over the years. And so there's just all these different styles and approaches mixed into one project. A lot of old things that were left there that are sort of doing some stuff, but
Yeah,
then there's other things overwriting it and they're doing it in kind of weird ways. And it's just like the planning stages of stuff as new people were coming in, there was none. So it just became this layering and layering and layering. But you can't take any of the old stuff out either because it's sneaking its way in like awkward ways, and it's just like everything's built on top and it becomes a bit of a disaster. Um, Another one, a little bit in the same vein of when it comes to like a lack of planning from the beginning, where you'll get, say, there's 5 developers working on something, and if the project management isn't correct from the beginning and everybody's getting their own thing that they have to work on, they're opening up that component in Figma, and then they're just writing the CSS they need for that. they're not looking at what exists. They're not looking at anything else. They're not looking if inheritance could even help them out. Like they're declaring the font size, they're declaring the colors, they're declaring everything because this is the one little thing that they're looking at and told that they have to do, and then they get it to work. But then they're, they might have been able to accomplish the same thing with 3 lines of CSS, relying on what was already in the project. But there just wasn't, and I part of that, I think the blame can fall on the developer themselves for that, for not knowing, like looking at the scope of the project and seeing what's already there and already existing. But a lot of the projects I've seen where that actually is an issue is usually it was there from the beginning, and I think it comes down more to a project management standpoint, where the people that are higher up that are organizing everything don't have the proper understanding of CSS either. So they're not, when they're assigning these things or talking to things, or you're in, they're approving the pull requests and other stuff, they're not looking at that either. So that creates issues. Those are, I guess, the two main ones. Like, just the legacy projects can be such a disaster. And then just, yeah, I have a friend who works as a um, design systems CSS person. His name's Mike Aparicio, and I like his thing because his pitch to get hired is, I'll write the CSS so your other developers don't have to. And he just builds the design system for them. But what I think the important part about that idea is less so like, for him doing that, it's cool because he gets just to write CSS all day long. But it's also that, generally speaking, the more people you have writing it, the harder it is to be consistent, because everybody's going to have, even if you have some like standards of how the CSS should be written, everybody sort of has their own opinions on certain
Oh
things, or just
yes.
their own approach to something. And so if you have, the more people you have doing it, the harder it gets to do properly, or not properly, but just the more muddled everything can get. And so if you can have smaller teams working on it, I do think that can go a long way.
Yeah, it becomes very chaotic code base,
Yeah.
right?
and and there's the issue there, because CSS is different from the other languages in that it does have a global context that people want to avoid, right? And so the two things that happen there, one of them is where you're using style components in one way or another. So you're trying to scope your styles to that thing. And that's where you just end up with people writing the same code over and over and over again because they don't realize that someone else did that in their component, and so on. Um, or it becomes this layered mess of things just because everything is built on top in an unorganized way. And but when if you write like if you do some JavaScript and you do it properly and it's sort of encapsulated, if you need to change it, it shouldn't have any outside effects. That's the whole point of writing a good thing in
Yes.
JavaScript, is it won't impact anything else. Whereas with CSS, you sort of want to rely on that global. If you're doing CSS the right way, in my own opinion, it should have a reliance, at least to a certain extent, on the global scope. And that makes it harder because you're sort of have these different levels of things that are competing for styling something. So I think that's also where it can play into, like, the more people you have getting involved in it, the more potential there is for things to go off the rails.
For breaking codes, yes. And
Yeah,
another I want to say disaster that I met most of the time is that there is a wave of developers who don't care about CSS at all. And what are they doing? They're just copy pasting what Figma, for example, is giving them
yeah,
with these
yes,
decimal codes, with bunch of stuff, and with a bunch of unnecessary CSS properties there. And in
yeah,
result, you have a very like a code which, instead of working this way, it's working like this all the time, and you can't do anything with it. If you're trying to change it, you're digging into technical depth, and it
yeah,
causes you a lot of issues. I remember that like Stack Overflow did a survey this year, and they asked about 65,000 developers, and about 32% of them are not happy at work at all. Like 47% is always saying that there's like a lot of complicated stuff going on in the work, and like 62% of them answers that the reason is technical debt. And it was in startups, in already um, like full organizational layers. It's everywhere. How do you think like this can be addressed and fixed? Like, do we need to like provide, like as a startups or as a company, do they need to have like this 2 month or 3 month sprint where they can just go over and start to reduce the technical debt, or they just need to ignore it and start with new code style and keep it from that point on?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I mean, obviously, the best thing is to try and not have any in the first place, if possible, which I don't think is realistic, but to minimize as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think, but I think part of the issue there is in a lot of like the startup culture is, you know, ship it and fix it later. And if you're making an MVP or something like that, and you're just trying to get something out there, most of the time that's just like you saying we're okay occur sorry, we're okay just having technical debt, right? And building it up, and it doesn't matter, we'll deal with it later. And then usually when it comes time to deal with it, the question is like, well, do we want this new feature or do we want to deal with that? And it ends up being the new feature that wins out because that's something you can market and not. So I think, yeah, it is a really hard question to deal with. I do think with CSS, there are some ways that you can address it, maybe even easier than with other things. Like if you come in with if you decide at one point that like, okay, we're going to start doing things properly moving forward, and you're using, you know, whether it's your own design system you're creating or there's something coming in from that, but you could just have everything, you know, this new design system. That's why you usually use prefixes with them. But if you have all your classes prefixed with your design system, you know, then like the new things coming in are coming in with that prefix, so you know that's part of the system that has been approved. We're all working from that. And then you can have some people when there's time available that are going through older things, potentially updating them so they are part of the system, or finding like new ways. Okay, this is how it was done, we need to update it this way, let's build a new thing, and then spend the time updating whatever was relying on that. But I think it's a really hard thing to justify putting time into unless there's like, you know, to upper management or whatever it is, unless you can show that it's beneficial for everybody. And yeah, so obviously when, you know, time is money to the companies, so being able to justify it, I think, is the hardest thing. But I do think it is something that's worth tackling. It's sort of like what you said, like I don't even think it has to be the whole team on sprints doing it, but you could have a couple of people sort of
Oh,
getting
yeah.
rotated through on different things. Just, yeah, every now and then, just to clean up some things and fix some things so you're not running into those issues.
Yeah, like an optimization team
Yeah.
or something like that, right?
Yeah.
By the way, you're doing only content creation now, or you're also doing some work, working on other projects or etc.?
So yeah, for the last little bit, I've only been doing content creation. When I went from it being a hobby project to a side gig to almost my full-time job to eventually the full-time job. So as I was doing those transitions, I had freelance work that became a bit of consulting, and then just sort of the amount of consulting I did lowered as the content creation took more attention. I wanted to continue doing more because I think it's important in the content I'm creating to have a hand in real projects and not just be, you know, I don't want to just be reading the docs and building stuff based on that experience. I think it's important, to have my hand in real things. The issue I had was that a lot of the things I would be brought into on the consulting side of things weren't things I enjoyed very much. Either it was usually by the time someone would be asking for my help, it was at a point where there was so much work to be done, and then it wasn't even that wasn't the bad part. It's then convincing people, a little bit like we were just talking about, is you have all this technical debt, things weren't done properly, you need to spend a lot of time to fix that, and then not everyone wants to hear that. They were hoping for easier solutions to come in and fix things. So a lot of, you know, and maybe I wasn't as good at communicating the why or the how or other things, I'm not sure, but I just found it wasn't, a lot of the things I was doing I wasn't really enjoying. So I said, you know what, I'll do the content creation and focus on that as long as I can, which so far so good. And then I have a few side projects that I am working on though that are, it's
Personal
a bit
ones?
different because I'm, personal ones that will hopefully be turned into something a bit bigger eventually. But it's very slow going. But it's sort of my way of keeping, like, I'm building real things that are shipping, so at least
Right.
that's going on. Yeah.
What are your key responsibilities as a consultant?
It really depends on the projects. Um, and I found the earliest thing when I first started, the early thing was to find out exactly why they wanted me to be coming in, because different companies I think had different opinions, or it wasn't even different companies, but it'd be different people within the company would have different opinions on what they were hoping I'd be able to achieve. But a lot of the time it was just to fi- kind of
Fix
not clean
things.
up the CSS, but yeah, fix, like, try and take a big picture view of what's going on, because no one's done that on from the styling point of view. And come in with a system that they'd be able to use, and bring into place. But that was where a lot of the time it would be, oh, that's a great idea. We'll maybe focus on that later, instead of, like, once they saw how much work it would be to properly implement it, and do everything, because it would be a very big cultural shift from how they were already working. And so, like, implementing those changes, if you're in a company that wants to do that, can be really awesome. But when there's resistance to that, because instead they just want to ship the next whatever's lined up in the next sprint, then it doesn't work.
And unfortunately, those people are like, on average, they're more frequently, you can more frequently solve them as a client instead of those who want to do real big changes, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the time the ones who, I mean, there are ones who realize, okay, we've hit a point now where we want to make a big change, we're willing to invest in it. But usually the ones, they already probably have a plan in place, whereas it's the ones where everything's a disaster that are hoping for generally a quick fix. um, and the solution rarely is a very quick fix. Yeah.
Most of the time, you even might be like taking extra hours and sitting doing everything from scratch, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time that's what it. Most of the time, if it's bad, you basically need to start from scratch, come in with a proper thing. Like, you have designers using Figma, get them creating some tokens and getting those tokens then brought over. And there's so many awesome ways and easy ways to do. Well, not easy ways, but having the designers build up the full design system instead of just flinging stuff at the wall. And then we can create. They're gonna have their design tokens that's easy to get into to the next step. You have your JSON file or however you're doing it from there, and then it just goes through the whole system. But then it's also, even if you have that set up, is how do you make sure that the developers are actually using the system that's being put in place? And it's a really long process to go through all of that, and then to train people to use it properly and everything else. So yeah, it's not necessarily the easiest thing, and especially when there's multiple teams involved in it.
Right. You mentioned design tokens. What is it? I
So I
know
mean, there's
design
different.
system, but I don't know about
Yeah,
the
so,
token.
I mean, there's different ways of looking at it, but if you have a design system, say all your color, the same way you'd have your variables or whatever, like
Right.
you have all your colors set up, those become your tokens, let's say, and then you have, so, or even your spacing things, like anything that's just a variable that's like, this is
I
our
see.
colors, you just, yeah, instead of calling them variables, they're tokens, because going from one split across everything else.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. I got it. But let's talk about challenges. Like switching from doing projects, which most of the time I believe it pays more than content creation, especially in the beginning. It might be very challenging for you. Is there anything else that like truly challenge your CSS journey?
I think my Yeah, but I think that's what I enjoy about it, is when I run
Okay.
into different things. I can't think of like a specific thing where I'm just like, "Oh my goodness, I don't know how to," this one thing I'm not sure about. But a lot of the time, like, when I first started doing a lot of freelance work, my main thing was I was doing WordPress development, but I was creating child themes. So I just take a theme and basically delete the CSS file and then make it look however I needed it to look. Um, and then yeah, I thought that was really fun. And so that made me get creative of different ways of accomplishing things and having fun with that. So I think part of like, and then just the learning that has to go on and like, is this possible? How can I make that happen? And all those different things. So I think along that front, it's worked well. And I've been lucky in the sense of like the way the YouTube channel went because I wasn't planning on it being my full time thing. It was sort of that became like my playground a little bit. Like I can just come up with something, try and do it, turn that into something. So it was like a really slow progression of switching from full-time job to, as I said, it was like a side gig. It was a little bit of extra money, and then like that slow change over made that transition fairly easy and just gave me, yeah, I saw it for a long time as a playground to have fun with on that front.
What I was thinking, like most of the time, I mean, I'm not taking into consideration Canada
Yeah.
or US because like Europe is working completely different at that part of the world. For those who just want to do, who want to go with from your steps, like start a YouTube channel, evangelize CSS in different countries, or etc.
Yep.
Like for them, what will be the challenging part? Like, of course, Europe is another thing with getting the viewers, etc., etc. You have to have this charisma in you, so it will be more viewable the content. Besides that, I was curious, like, what are other challenges that you were facing during this shift from side
Yeah.
gig to a full-time job?
Yeah. So if I hadn't started it as a hobby project, I wouldn't have continued with it because at the beginning nobody was watching any of my content. Right? I see channels now like people will message me and sort of, ask if I have any help or suggestions, and they'll share the link to their channel. And I always like looking at that because I'm happy to help people in that type of thing. And then I'm looking and they're like, oh, they've had their channel for 3 months and they have like 1,500 subscribers and they have like 6 videos that have thousands of views. And I'm like, I don't know, you're better than I was at that point because it took me, I think it took me like a year to get to 1,000 subscribers. Um, like my channel's almost at 1 million viewers now, but it's also 8 years that I've been doing this, and I've been uploading at least one video a week for 8 years. So like, and
Consistency.
at the beginning, yeah, consistency is a really big part of it. um, Things change also just with how YouTube works. In a sense, I got lucky in that I didn't really have a lot of competition, and it wasn't on purpose. It was just like there wasn't, and there still isn't really many other channels that talk a lot about CSS. There was a channel that loved called Dev Tips with Travis. The guy who ran it was called Travis Nielsen, and I ended up talking to him 6 months ago maybe, and his channel was almost entirely CSS. And he
Oh,
said
wow.
part of the reason he stopped because it must have been about 10 years ago that he was doing it. And one of the reasons he told me he stopped was because he felt a lot of pressure that if he wanted the channel to continue to do well was to branch out into other things that he didn't want to do. So getting into the JavaScript frameworks and you know the other web development stuff that he wasn't interested in. And so he yeah, it was one of the reasons he ended up stopping his channel. And so he was like really talking with me, he was super excited just that like, oh, it could have worked, but like he was super happy to see that I had a channel that where I managed to succeed with it and continue to grow it. But I do think not having a lot of competition probably helped, and that's a lot harder these days than it was when I started.
Oh, right, for sure, for sure. I mean, even for 3GS, like there's two things in software development that I'm most like curious. It's like CSS and 3GS. I love both. I've been reading about them a lot. And like even for 3GS, there are two or three people who actually deliver the content. And I believe we also follow one of the guys, even two of them, Bruno Simon and Anderson Mancini. I remember that we even had a talk on X about the latest features of CSS, DVH thing.
Yes, yeah.
Even for them, like for him also, it's quite complicated because he's just starting doing his content, and the
Hmm.
YouTube rules has been changed completely. And he was struggling a lot when we were talking about the YouTube channel and stuff. He was like, "Oh yeah, I know It's Bruno, but he's doing like a lesson thing. I want to try to YouTube, but it's not working. It's hard. So yeah, it's really like the way of the working of the YouTube channels and stuff like this. It's completely changed.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
would say that patience is really important though. But it's a hard thing to balance a little bit just because like I know for me, like my channel probably took 2 to 3 years to like get anywhere. And again, that if I wasn't doing if I was doing it to try and build it into something, I don't think I would have waited that long. But because I was just doing it for myself, it was fine. Uh, so I do think patience is really important, but at the same time, if you continue doing something and you're not seeing any growth or improvement or anything like that, like maybe there's something you need to change. So it is really hard to know,
like
like, am I actually doing something correctly and I just need to wait, or am I doing something wrong that I need to improve on? So that, yeah, that's definitely a bit of a challenge to know which one it is.
oh, for sure. You've been in web development like a very long time, 15 plus years. Are there any new features, especially in CSS, that like have revolutionized and you're most there excites you most? Let's call it this way.
Yeah. So there's been a few phases of it, definitely. In a way, also, I think I got lucky with starting my channel when I did because I had time to sort of figure everything out and get comfortable creating content. And then CSS suddenly got really exciting and started changing a lot. So, I have no shortage of content ideas right now just because there's so much happening. But the first big change from when I started was the channel was grid, and I got really big into grid. It's not new these days, but it definitely changed how we make websites. And then after grid, there was a long lull. And there's like little things that came along that I think were cool and useful. I guess custom properties too actually were a pretty big game changer around the same time. But then we got some of the math functions and these little things that were improvement of life, but they didn't revolutionize anything. I think now that is we have a lot of things in the last 2 years up until now and going into the future that are potentially going to be really big game changers. I'm trying to think off the top of my container queries are a weird one because I think container queries everyone it was the thing that everybody wanted and then we got them and no one really started using them. But I'm very convinced that the reason that they haven't really changed how we're doing things is because we're using them like media queries because they look exactly like a media
Yeah,
query. Um, and so like we've been anybody who's making websites for the last 15 years has been using media queries for 15 years. Like it's been, or at least 10 years. I think that we've been using media queries. And so like we've all been trained really well on the constraints and how to think and how to use a media query. And we need to change that mindset a lot for container queries. Just because they can do more stuff. It's not just about looking at the width of something, because the units you use can also change. And then so you can actually, like Andy Bell had a really good post on his website where he used a container query, but so you're looking at the size of the container, but then he was using viewport units for the unit in the query. So he's comparing the size of the element to the size of the viewport. And so you're comparing two different things together, which is something you could never do with a media query. And if you're using other units like ch or rem or other stuff, like you can do really interesting and cool things that I think we haven't unlocked yet, but I think it's going to start coming. And with container queries, the second spec of it, which isn't as well supported yet because regular container queries have pretty good support now. The other one is style queries. I think that's actually going to revolutionize how we change or how we write our CSS. So you can the eventual spec for style queries is you could say like at container and then it's a style function. You could say like if the container, so with the parent, has background purple, you could do different styles on the element that you've selected.
oh wow.
Right now that yeah, yeah, it's really cool. Right now that doesn't work though. You can only query for custom properties,
Hmm.
but for me that's even more useful. So you can almost use it like I'm trying to think of the example that I've been doing, but like I have one where it's like an alternate layout. So you can just if you change I have a custom property on I'll put like a card alternate layout. And then on the parent, I can just choose the alternate layout or whatever through that custom property, and it completely changes the layout of the cards that are nested 5 levels deep within that element or something. So you can just have like these switches basically once you've built out the system a little bit. And it's a little bit like using a modifier class, but the advantage is you can do it within media queries or container queries. So as the viewport's changing and then the layout shifts, at that breakpoint, you can change the value of a custom property. So you can sort of toggle these inner styles. It's really, yeah, it's interesting.
It's great. I didn't know about
Yeah,
it. I will definitely
definitely
keep a
worth looking
look.
into. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about like burnouts? Do you have them?
Sorry, burnouts?
Yeah.
Oh, me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I've I've come close, definitely. Um, Now that I'm getting older too, I find it a lot harder to do as much work as I used to. Like I used to work full time, get home from work, deal with the family, the kids. After the kids would go to bed, I would record some YouTube videos. I'd make courses in the evenings. Like I don't know how I did it. Now I can't. Like if it's past 6 p.m., it's really hard to do anything productive. If I'm like, okay, I have like a crunch time now, I need to get some extra work done. I'm just tired and I can't concentrate anymore. Um, but I've also definitely I think the two things on the burnout is like, and I think for anyone who's getting into content or wants to make content, it's important to like make content that you enjoy. Because even though I'm making content about CSS all the time, which is something I enjoy. Even just like the style of video or anything like that really goes into it, because sometimes it does just become a slog to like, oh, I need another video. Like, oh man, and it can, and then you get like, oh, I need another one. And if your topics that you're talking about aren't things that are fun to talk about, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes you do your work. If not everyone enjoys the stuff they're doing at work, you just get it done. But when it's just consistently like that, it can be really hard. So I've definitely had times where I was like just fed up, and then I have taken a couple of breaks from YouTube, but not very many. So sometimes I have done that, and other times I've just like, for the next month I'm just making like, I'll make a code pen of something that's fun to make or really easy, where I'm not really teaching anything. I'm just like, here's how I would make this button, and it's not like let's learn about this property or value or function or whatever it is. It's just let's build something that I thought was fun to build, and then doing that like a few times is definitely refreshing. It sounds silly, but like, or here's a really simple layout from front end mentor that I don't really have to think about to create. I can just sort of do it in my sleep a little bit. But people like that type of content, and then right, so things like that, and just changing it up to stay fresh on the type of things I'm talking about. Uh, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that's prevented me. Anytime I'm really feeling like it's becoming heavy and I'm not motivated, because that's usually the start of it spiraling, is just to find things that I'm interested in or that I really want to talk about. And if I have other things planned, I'll push them off or I'll do other stuff, um, and then just try and keep it really light for a little while.
You're trying to find that balance between content creation and personal life.
Yeah, yeah. And it can definitely be hard, and especially when I have courses that I'm working on, because the courses can be a lot of work, and they're the type of thing that's really fun at the beginning. When you're putting an outline together, it's like, okay, well, I mean, fun. It's not so fun making a lesson plan, but you're more motivated at the beginning of a new project, like anything you're doing. So you put together the lessons, you have an outline for the course, and like it's not so bad. And then by the time you're 3/4 of the way through it, and you've just written like 100,000 words of lessons, and it's about topics, you're just getting into the nitty gritty of everything. Like it's like, okay, let's keep going. But it gets harder as you get through it, and then once you hit a certain point and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, it gets easier again, because then you're motivated to actually finish it. But that about 3/4 of the way through it can be hard.
What is the most rewarding part of the content creation for you?
So every now and then I'll get a comment on YouTube or someone who email me or DM me, and they'll tell me that CSS was the part of their job they hated the most, and now it's their favorite part of their job. That for me is like, that motivates me so much. And I'm like, okay, like for that one person, like like that's basically my mission statement now. So if I know I did it for that one person, like I did my job for the day. Like that's super rewarding for me.
I mean, I'm telling you, you did a lot of stuff. Even for me, I learned a huge, huge amount of things by watching your YouTube videos. And it's kind of cool. It's very easy to understand, which is like, I believe, the main point of its success. Like you're always trying to explain it as simple as possible in a simple words without any complications. Here is it. Here's the example. Here's how you can write it. And it's like ticking. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that I got okay at that doing that was because I taught in the classroom and because I wrote about it in my newsletter this week. But like when you're talking to a group of people in front of you and trying to explain something, you know immediately whether they understand or not. Because if they don't, they're just looking at you with this blank stare in their face. And so you're realizing like, okay, I need to rephrase that in a different way or re-explain it. And the biggest thing I understood was the like I could understand something really well, but it's to know all like there'll be anything you're doing, there's like pre-existing knowledge that you're basing what you know on. So I might be explaining how this one simple feature works, but you have to understand like five other things. So it's like how deep into those five other things do I need to explain and like talk about, and just having actual people give immediate feedback in the classroom, I think made me much better at sort of breaking things down. And also, like you said, like trying to phrase things in ways that are simple. Because if you're trying to learn something new and then there's the jargon on top of it, it gets really hard to understand
Yeah.
what's actually going on.
Yeah. And by the way, when it comes from teaching classroom to online education with Twitch courses and YouTube channel. Um, I think how's the community is helping you, like with the comments, with personal emails about asking you different questions. Does this helps you in the same way as you got that help from the audience while working on the teaching class?
Yeah, it's not the same, but it definitely is important. YouTube comments most of the time. Most YouTube comments are just really nice, like, oh, thank you so much, or that was great, and other stuff, which obviously is nice to read, but it doesn't help me get better. So I always, if there's a constructive piece of criticism, I always appreciate it, whether um, it's, if it gives me an idea of like, I can do this one thing better. The one piece of constructive criticism I've never been able to solve is that a lot of people that are mostly, I think it's for people that aren't native English speakers, say that I talk too fast. And so
Okay.
I've tried for a long time to slow down, but and so sometimes you'll notice at the beginning of videos, I'll be talking a bit slower. And then as I'm going through it, I get faster and faster just because I get more into my natural rhythm and I start like I'm not concentrating so much on that once I get into the subject. So that's been something that I struggle with. But um, the questions I do get are super useful. Like I get content ideas. I just like the back and forth sometimes, a lot of the time with people, and things like that. But I do find it's a different type of feedback you're getting when it's more delayed through comments or social media or DMs or whatever it is, or emails. It's one reason I want to start doing some workshops where it's you get it from live streams actually too, where at least in a live stream there's that immediate feedback. It's not the same thing as a classroom, but it's as close as you're going to get, I think, online, where you can have an idea at least if things are going in the right direction.
Yeah, right. What about like I'm curious about um, your opinion. Like, how long right now will it take to learn not like simple basics, but like foundational, get that foundational knowledge about the CSS? At your opinion, like a
Yeah,
month or two?
yeah, I think it's a yeah, I think that makes sense. I think you can get pretty comfortable with writing it within a couple of months if you're taking it seriously and really trying to understand not just like how do I accomplish this one thing, but like why does it work that way. You can get a good foundation, and then it's one of those things we are always learning more. Like I've been teaching uh between the classroom and on YouTube. I've been teaching for like 12 years now or something. And even on some, like, obviously the new stuff is changing and there's new stuff happening, but I still learn something new about like the foundational stuff every now and then. Something will come up and I'll just be like, oh, how did I not know that? Like, when you can't do transitions on inline elements. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I
I think it
found
was
it
like
in a
6
very
months ago.
hard way.
Yeah. It's just like everything your dev tools don't show you anything wrong. Everything you're doing, and it's just like you're banging your head against the wall. And it's just, I think it was like 6 months ago I realized that, and I'm just like, okay, there's something really foundational that I should have known a long time ago. Um, but I think the most important thing is, yeah, if you can like put in some time and really just try and understand that foundational knowledge of the parts that aren't really like, instead of just like how to accomplish that layout, and it's more about like how does Flexbox work, or how does grid work, how does the formatting models work, and all these different things. Like, if because if you can understand those things, and like Flexbox is super weird, and you don't need to know like the nitty gritty of the Flexbox algorithm because it's complicated, but if you understand the approach that Flexbox does to figure out the size of things, when you're using it, you're going to be so much better at using it. And when you run in, and yeah, when you run into a problem, you have a solution already because you sort of know what's causing it. Or you might not know the actual thing, but you have an idea of like, okay, this went wrong, it's probably because of this. And I think that's really where knowing CSS well
Mhm.
separates people, is that part where they can, if it's not knowing immediately what to do, but it's understanding a lot about it. So when things aren't working how they think, they have a good idea of why and a different approach they can take. And part of it is you build up that foundation and then just lots and lots of practice.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Right?
there's even these games. I've been playing it a lot when I was just starting to learn it, like Flexbox Froggy,
Yeah,
Grid, and there was another one for Grid, and they're helping you a lot to just get into it, to understand how to
yeah,
write the things out, to automate your brain to automatically write down what needs to be done. And I remember that I was like, only for Flexbooks in the beginning, I spent maybe 3 4 hours to just sit in there. I mean, I still have my books and notebooks somewhere here, but I was just sitting there writing by hand or drawing how Flexbox is working
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
to just got into it. But like right now, I believe a lot of people just will read 2 sentences, and I was like, okay, we'll deal with it somehow.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and there's weird, like, Flexbox is weird and the problems that can come up when you're using it are like, they can be weird, and that's the problem. Like, as you said, people will be like, oh, I get it, it aligns stuff and I'll look up the properties when I need them, but then they don't always work because there's some weird thing getting in the way or whatever. It's, yeah,
Especially, for example, working with scrolls, right? If you're working with scroll elements and using Flexbox, you can have very strange results sometimes, because like you can't apply overflow hidden, and sorry,
yep,
you're applying overflow with the display fill x, and you have like this strange anomalies going back and forth. And if you don't know what exactly caused this, you will never find out. That you just need to, for example, delete justified content center to get it work right.
yep. Yeah,
On
but
average, how much time did you spend by doing your learning process every day? Like you were spending like consistently 3 4 hours every day to learn everything.
it depends a lot on what I'm working on. So like right now I'm trying to put together a deep dive on view transitions that is proving, it's a bigger, I knew it was a big topic and it's proving to be much bigger than I anticipated.
Oh, seriously.
So yeah, for that, yeah, it's I'm there's yeah, it's awesome. The stuff you can do with it's great, but I'm just like, I'm swimming right now. And like, part of the problem is I have all of this and it's like, okay, now I want to teach it, so I have to organize it in a way that makes sense to me so that I can do it in a logical flow in a video to like have like build, you need that like building up way. So like right now I'm at that stage of like, okay, I think I have everything understood. Now, how do I take it to that next thing of like breaking it down into a demo that I can go through all of these different parts and do it in a way that makes sense to build on top of one piece on top of the other one. But just the learning on that, like, and that's where I find sometimes I don't plan well enough because I'll be like, okay, I'm doing planning for this, and it's not a topic I know, so I'll put 3 hours in my calendar of just. And for me, like my learning process is usually I'm in MDM docs and the actual spec. The actual spec is you don't want to read the spec if you don't have to, but sometimes you end up in there. And actually, I will say the spec writers know that it's difficult to read. Some of it has to be difficult to just because it's really the specs usually for the browser engineers, and it has to outline the exact expected behaviors, and it's going to be done in a very technical way. But a lot of the newer specs either have more visuals or extra explanation. So the spec is easier to read now than the older ones. If you do end up on new specs, I find they're much friendlier, but they're still very dry and very long and kind of technical. So the MDM is always the nice place to go because then it's more user friendly to read.
Right. Yeah,
So
sure.
I spend a lot of time on the MDM and then build. The other one is the Google Chrome for Developers blog. Those guys are awesome as new features are coming out. And then it's just building like, okay, I get it, but I'm going to build something with it now and try and make silly demos and just really like proof of concept things and then see if that works, try and break it, do whatever I can with it, and then just iterate and then actually turning it into something that's worth covering. But yeah, it really depends. If it's a topic I don't know anything about, it could be anywhere from like 1 hour to multiple days of trying to learn it properly. And then if it's something like if I'm trying to teach something that I already am familiar with, it's a lot easier, but I do still refer back to a lot of the docs just because I want to make sure like I remember things and I've made mistakes in videos where I'm talking about Flexbox and like what the shorthand is just because I use it all the time and like I'll make you we just have slips in our knowledge or whatever. So even though I've done it a million times, then like I just forgot that one time and then somehow that becomes the way that I think it works. So I'm much more careful now and just making sure that like, okay, I understand this properly. Even though it's something I think I know.
Are you doing some rehearsal processes before like
Mm.
recording the final video, or you're just let's go it?
So I'll whatever is in my video, I'll have already done it or built it. I've gone through the entire thing. I haven't said it out loud, but I've run through the most of the time. There are if you see any of my videos where it says from scratch in the title, that means it's my
Okay.
first time trying. Um,
Okay.
that's one of those fun ones that I do when I'm feeling a little burnt out. Is just like I'm not even going to do prepare a demo for this. I'm just going to make it and let's hope that it goes well. Because if it doesn't, I just won't release the video. But I do think those ones are useful though. I'll edit out like if I get stuck on a bug for like 15 minutes, I'm not going to leave that 15 minutes in there, but I will show what the problem was and how I
Yeah.
figured it out and how I solved it. And I think that's super important to include in educational content. But yeah, most things I do, I'll have at least built the final version once, and then I'm ready to record it. And I usually have as I'm building out that first version, I'll do like a bullet list of the different things I'm doing, just so I have like if I need to reference my final code, I have the finished version. But then I also have the bullet list of like the main things I want to make sure that I talk about that as I was going through that. Because sometimes it's easy if even though you've built it once, then the next day you're going to go to record. It's easy to forget one step then it screws everything up. so so yeah, I always have a finished version, then I record, and even on the recording, sometimes most of the time it'll go pretty good, but sometimes I make some pretty big mistakes, and I either have to go back or just I have started over for sure.
Yeah, I see. You mentioned that you're working on multiple projects right now, and I got a question like, which one of them holds a special meaning or symbolizes a pivotal point in your career?
Oh, Of what I'm working on now, I'm not sure. Well, actually, no, it's not. So I'm working on. I guess this would be a pivotal point in terms of it being right now. Is I'm building out my own course platform.
Great.
Because up until now, I've always relied on. I've tried two different course platforms. And at the beginning, I was just needed somewhere that could upload video because all my lessons I did YouTube, so everything's video lessons. So I just want somewhere, and so like, there's a lot of services out there that do it. It wasn't really worth my time to try and do something custom. But now I want to do a lot more with my courses. So it's, I have written content, I have quizzes, I have uh practice, like I want like embedded things people can play with, but then there's bigger exercises and projects, and there is video, and like every single platform I've played with is pretty good, but it's like sort of like with Bootstrap, right? Like Bootstrap's fine, but it's made for everybody. So it's not really
Yeah.
exactly what I need. And I have like bit of a specific workflow, and it would be really cool if I could turn that workflow into part of just the course is now ready, and I don't have to bring it from this one thing into something else. So I decided to make my own platform, which is, yeah, I'm
Which is
hoping actually to have
interesting.
it done. It's a fun project. It's definitely out of my comfort zone because I'm really a front end developer, and so having to figure out back end stuff has been fun. But yeah.
What tech stack did you choose for your backend and front end?
So I did I mean, front end, I went back and forth actually, because on larger projects I still use SAS. Um, and I decided not to for this one, just to see if, like, how it would work if I didn't. Because it saves me tons of time. Like, people, I think these days think modern CSS, like that, or when they think of SAS, they think of nesting, which you can do in modern CSS now.
Yep.
We have variables with custom properties and stuff, but like I use maps and for loops and mixins a lot. And so like I'll have a map of values, and those values can get turned into custom properties that I use. So it's sort of like this just like middle early stage part of my project mostly that just speeds things up a lot. And I wanted to see if I could do without it, and so far it's been pretty good. There's definitely a little bit that I wish that I could take from my SAS build and put into it. Um, but yeah, I use that for the front end. And then as I said, I wanted something that worked with how I work. So I have a bit of a weird setup. I'm using Paddle for payment processing.
Hmm.
Then I'm using Supabase for the database. And
Hmm.
one of the reasons I went with Supabase is because I wanted something that could handle auth without me having to stress about it. And they have the built-in auth that's actually pretty easy, or actually very easy. But I've actually started, just for fun, I wanted to see how it would work, because it's a personal project and I get to experiment a bit. So I've also, I switched the auth to clerk, which has been good. And then the actual, like, Supabase is like the main database, but the content itself I just have in Notion, because Notion's where I do all of my work. And that was I made like a quick proof of concept, because I wanted to see all of my coursework, all my YouTube work, everything I do is in Notion. And I have a database for every course, and all the lessons are all in that database. And so I was like, having to take those lessons out of Notion and put them into somewhere else. And then if I make a change, am I making it twice? Like, it was a pain in the butt. So I wanted to see, like, can I keep everything in one place? And so far it's worked. I'm using, I have some caching going on too, because the problem with Notion is every time you'd want to generate a page, it has to render the what's coming in from Notion and then turn it into HTML.
Oh
So
yeah.
I was getting pretty long page, like the loading times were kind of long. So then I set it up. I have some caching going on now. So once it's been rendered once, the rendered version's sitting in the cache for long enough that it's sped up things a lot on that front. But yeah, it's been a good learning process, and there's still a long way to go. But I'm hoping in January that it'll be ready.
Are you using for like a Next.js or any
I'm
other
using
framework?
Astro.
Astro.
Yeah, and I have a few components that um, are Svelte, like Svelte components in Astro.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for backend, as far as I understood, you fully rely on a clerk and some connections with Supabase, and that's it. You're not like
Yeah.
building a full backend architecture from scratch by using
No.
Nest.js or
Yeah.
Node.js.
No. Yeah.
Do you think it's a good actually solution for like an educational platform to rely on like Clerk or Superbase instead of having your own like backend?
Um, I could definitely see benefits of having your own for my I wanted to see if I could do it with as like a proof of concept, and I was
Okay.
worried about a few things like and then it worked pretty well, and then my main issue was just the speeds on things were a bit slow, but I've been able to optimize it pretty well to the point where I'm like, "You know what? For this type of thing, I think it's completely fine." Um it definitely I wouldn't make this a product that I would sell. Like I wouldn't be like, here's my LMS like for other people to use because I think it's a little bit weird in how it's set up and how it's working. But I think yeah, I don't have any major issues with it, and I think using something like Clerk for Auth or even just like Supabase Auth could have worked fine. I think that actually works well. I think using something that does that side of things is good, and then yeah, I guess it depends on the needs and the other things, but for everything I'm doing so far, it's yeah, it seems to be fine. I'm also not going. I'm doing it as I said. I'm learning a lot through it, and then I'm gonna get a bunch of users in testing it to make sure that I didn't muck anything up. Since I'm not super comfortable with all of the stuff I'm doing, and I'm like,
Yeah.
there's probably hopefully no security flaws, but we'll find them. That'll come
Oh,
later
for
though.
sure, for sure. Like what I
Yeah.
love most in development community is like we're very helpful. We really
Yes.
help each other in like we don't need anything in return. Like we found a
Yeah.
bug, we can just report and like, hey, you know what? There was a bug in your code. It can cause like a security issues. Here's the fix, and that's it. And this is something very special thing. You might not see anything similar in any other industry actually.
Yeah.
You won't
I
see it
agree. Yeah.
in Hollywood, you won't see it for sure in acting, also in marketing also. So it's very kind of warm community thing going on in development, which is
Mhm.
like inspiring, right? And the other question is, I love this, and I always ask this to my guests. What are your thoughts about the AI, like recent
Um,
development?
yeah. So it's a combination of like as someone who likes tech in general, yeah, that's really cool. As someone who works in tech, that's also kind of scary. Um, it's also like there's concerns around it, I think, from several different things. Like the first concern for mine isn't even about like employment or anything like that. It's more the environmental impact of things. Um, is like it is just tons of processing power, and the costs of it are being subsidized right now by just all these investors that are pouring billions of dollars into it. I would be surprised if any of the major or any of the existing models out there, in despite the way they're being commercialized right now, they're probably all bleeding money like crazy. um, just because the cost of all of it, like when talking to people that are more into the AI side of things than I am, I'm like, yeah, the cost of this is insane. And part of that cost has like environmental impacts on it, which is kind of like you know so that is a thing. I know a lot of people are concerned obviously about how it's going to impact the job market and other things like that. I guess as a CSS developer, I'm less worried than some other things because everything I've done on a CSS level so far, I haven't been very impressed by it. And I think part of the reason it's not good at that side of things, first of all, is the lack of good information that exists out there.
Mhm.
Um, the other side is just, as we talked a little bit about before, the way that CSS works is it doesn't just output some information, it has a visual impact
Yeah,
on the page. And even if like some of the newest version of Claude that just came out can interact with a web page, that means I don't know how it's quote unquote seeing it, but like we're having different algorithms now and these different things that can actually visually break down a
read it.
page. But
Yeah.
yeah, but even with that, I don't think it could. like the impact of changing one thing in CSS impacts the layout, and I don't like that context is so big. Like I think that's gonna be a really, really hard nut to crack. And the one thing I've said for a long time, in even like when the hype was first starting up, is while I mean, it's going to have an impact on our jobs in terms of, is it making us more productive? Probably. If it makes everybody 100% more productive, does that mean we need 50% less positions? Maybe, I don't know. So that's obviously like one of the concerns there. But I'm like, the other concern, I guess, or the balance the thing that I always look at is like, if it gets good enough to be able to literally replace people at the work we're doing, whether it's developing or anything else, like it's not only going to impact our industry, it's going to have major ramifications globally across most sectors. And so like if we do hit that tipping point, like that short period around that time is probably kind of scary and nobody knows how it's going to look. But yeah, it's like for people that are like, should I get into web development? I'm like, if you, because of AI, and I'm like, I get your hesitation, but what would you be interested in that wouldn't be impacted in the same way? There's probably are things, but probably less than we think about. So I mean, that's, I don't know how to think about that in general. It's just sort of where my mind goes with it, though, that it's much it's not something that's only impacting our industry, even though so much we look at is within what we do. Because obviously, you know, we see, if you're in development, you're seeing all the stuff it's doing where it's writing code and able to generate
Oh yeah.
pages and do all this really impressive stuff. Here's a napkin drawing of a layout, and then it can make the layout, and you're like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am concerned to a certain point, but not enough to think that for the medium term it's we're going anywhere. And I also think with anything like this, the scariest part of it is the like, it has to hit such a high level, because even now, like if it's getting 80% of things right, it's like this huge success from the AI standpoint. But 80% right's pretty terrible. Like if that's your baseline, like if you were a real developer getting 80%, or you know, you'd be
Like,
fired. You're not keeping your
yeah.
job. And so like,
But
and
if you're
then the
using
problem,
an AI, if you're using an AI which gives you 80% accurate code and you're doing the rest 20%, you may even get a raise.
yeah, it's true. but but then there's also like the, as the closer it gets to being like, the better it gets, the smaller the improvements are going to be. It's always right, like
Right.
it's always all the low hanging fruit at the beginning. It's like the self driving cars that everybody thought would have taken over by now, and we still don't really have them. And the ones that are there, there's so many issues that are still circulating around that. And I
Oh,
think
for
it's
sure.
that thing where you can make a car that can drive down the street in perfect conditions that don't have any variables or anything else. And then as the more complicated, like as you try and get to that last, it's the, what's it called? The curve there, where the hockey stick curve, everything gets harder. So like that last 5% is going to be 100 times harder than anything they've done so far. Um,
Agreed.
so yeah, I think it's something that's going to be around for a long. Well, it's here now. It's definitely a productivity tool, and how that affects things, I'm not sure, but it's going to be quite a while before I'm like, oh wow, I'm super worried about it. It's a sort of, but I
Mhm.
understand why people are concerned at the same time.
Yeah, agreed. I personally, for me, GPT is just like a super assistant or any other AIs that you're
Yeah,
using to, as you said, it's just a productivity tool. Like, if I need to research something about any technology, like, I can ask GPT to do that and give me a TLDR with all necessary information, and they're good at googling also. Right.
yeah.
There was this joke that a lot of people doing, like saying, what is the main difference between senior and junior developers? Like, the seniors know how to Google things.
Yeah.
And
I
now
will
it's
say
just,
that I did a video where I was asking three different models, like CSS quizzes, just to see how they would do. and I don't remember which one it was. It was either Copilot, which is using GPT, or Gemini. I don't remember which of the two it was, but one of them, the answer it gave was just wrong. And I was like, and then it says like, here's some useful resources, and it gave the MDM and something else that were actually good resources. So I was like, where did it get this? And I clicked on the MDM link, and I'm like, no, the right answer is right there. And I went back to it, and the source that it cited was a GitHub repo. And so I clicked into the GitHub repo, and it was this like random personal project that had like, it probably wasn't even like, it was this small little project that had like, I'm like, how did you even find this? Like, it's so arbitrary in this little thing. And I'm like, I was just like really confused by that one. But so yeah, sometimes their sources, I'm just like, especially for like Google, that like it, Google figured out a really good way to make a search algorithm. And I find like the information vetting sometimes that they do is questionable still. And I'm just like, oh, it's kind of funny how like they haven't figured out how to get it on that same like quality of content, like
Right.
the
Yeah.
realization of the quality of content yet, which is interesting. But some of
Yeah,
like,
they're
yeah,
struggling a lot. They
yeah,
always like had these super struggles with the AI models. I remember that there was like the Gemini tool that you just mentioned. When it just got out in the first release, it even did like a wrong simple math.
yeah.
Two plus two
Or
was equal for five or six or something like this.
yeah. Just the other day I asked it something just because it was with, I don't remember what it was, and my kids were with me. And I think it was just like, it was like a hey Google, and I asked it. And right away the answer it gave me, I was like, it was this absurd number, and I was just like, where did it get that? And then it starts explaining or maybe I asked it to explain, I'm not sure. And it went like, my kids are 9 and 12, and they're listening to it explain going, that makes no sense. Like, and it just took like this weird circular logic of like, this times this gives me this number, and you're like, yeah, that's the one I wanted. And then it sort of went backwards back over it and ended up like I don't remember what it did, but it just kept going into this weird circular logic and just building up the number until it got to something. I'm like, if you had no actual logic yourself and you read it, it would probably make sense. Like, you could sort of follow how it was doing it, but it was just like, but then, like with anything like that, I don't know. Yeah. The math for something that's computers doing it, you'd think that would be the one thing they'd be really good at, but somehow once they bring the logic and trying to figure things out into it, it just seems to throw them off the rails.
You mentioned you have two kids, 9 and 12, right?
Yeah.
That Do you think they will choose their father's path and become developers?
So I was trying, my older one actually did a video with me, where I was trying to teach him the very basics of HTML and CSS. He was just happy to be in a video, but it was okay. Like, whatever. We got enough done in half an hour or whatever it was. A bit of a struggle. He was a bit younger at the time, so he was probably 10 or something, 9 or 10. So it was, attention spans were very short, but we got a few things done. But I've been trying, like, since then, every now and then I'd be like just trying to like gauge interest. Would do you want to like try anything else? Build, do you have any ideas for stuff? And he had zero, like nothing, no interest at all. And then during the summer, this past summer, he was in a summer camp at a science center. And on the last day, they did a field trip, and it was to a web development agency. And
Wow.
now he wants to be a web developer. And I'm like, I'm just like, I've been, I'm like, come on, your YouTuber dad's been trying to get you into this, but you have no interest. And now all of a sudden, but I think they had like it was one of those places that's like a pretty cool office. They had like the ping pong tables and the
All
arcade
right.
machines and a slide and everything. So I'm like,
PlayStation.
yeah, exactly. So I think he's more interested in finding a job where he can do that than what the
Than
job actually
actually
entails.
working, yeah.
Yeah.
And what about the younger one?
I'm curious what I don't, he's all over the place with everything he does right now. Um, so I don't know. I have zero idea of what would interest him. And I think it's going to change a lot, but he is good at math and language stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets into something development, but he might go in a completely different direction. I have no idea with that one.
Like gaming.
Yeah. Oh, they would, both of them would be very happy just being gaming YouTubers, and I'm just like, that's not a job. And they're like,
What about game
yeah,
developers?
yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, that would be something that I could try and push them toward.
And Dad will be proud.
If they can get me some games for free, that'd be good.
But do you spend time playing together any video games?
Yeah. So one of the most fun games we played together was one most people probably haven't heard of, but it's called Nobody Saves the World. Um, it's just like it's like a platformer game. It's on Steam. It's probably like $10 or $15 or something. You can play like co-op.
Okay.
So me and my younger one, it was the two of them had started playing it together, and then the older one sort of got bored with it. So I ended up me and the younger one started a new game, and we played the whole thing, and then got the DLC and finished the DLC too. That was a lot of fun. Then I've started playing Fortnite with my older one a little bit, but it's okay. But it's it's a good way for us to play together. I'm terrible at it, but it's okay.
It's
um, I'm trying to think what else. We hadn't played it. They used to play tons of Minecraft, so I played a lot of Minecraft too. But-
right. Wow. But by the way, we spoke about everything, and I forgot the coolest question and the most important question. Do you have mentors back in the time when you just started?
uh, no, I didn't. I sort of just yeah. It was different. Well, part of it I think was just yeah. It was different in terms of like the internet wasn't what it was now. I didn't know anyone who was in web development personally. Um, and then yeah, you couldn't really learn online in the same way. There was definitely blogs and stuff to follow, but there was a few sites and that was about it, and especially in the early days. Um, yeah, and there's a lot of people that I've learned an incredible amount of information from, but not, you know, not in like the personal mentorship type of way, just following from a distance type of thing.
I
Uh,
see. But you became like a mentor for a lot of people during your teachings, like offline teaching periods, right? And
yeah, I hope so.
great. How do you guide them into their career paths?
Yeah, that I find it so hard beyond like especially now, like ev- it, when I was learning, it was also simpler in the sense of like there wasn't choice. Like if you wanted to have like when I mean I was doing WordPress stuff, but just getting into PHP, like that's what you used for anything that was
All
like,
right.
you that was it. If you needed that type of once you got past HTML, CSS, JavaScript stuff, you're throw some jQuery in there instead of JavaScript. And then if you needed more and templating and all of that, you were using PHP. So like that was the stack or whatever. And then just as time has gone on, it's gotten more complicated in terms of that. Like for even people asking me like front end, back end, what front end framework should I learn? I'm like, part of it depends on personal preference. Part of it depends on, do you want to get hired and how soon do you want to get hired? Would you be happy doing that type of work? And just like, um, a lot of the time I tell people to look at job postings local to their areas too, even if they're very early on, because that can help give them an idea of what they need to know once they graduate or once they finish or once they're ready for a job. Just because I know like everybody, React is by far the biggest of all the JavaScript frameworks, but you might be surprised to see that there's a whole bunch of high paying jobs using Angular because in the city I used to live, I have a friend who's an Angular developer, and the positions he gets at these government positions, and he's had a few at very big companies because it's these legacy systems that were built when Angular was the only thing. They're not going to tear it down and start over. They're just going to keep on going. And it's these massive companies with these really big things that are really good jobs to have. And it's all with Angular. So like you might be surprised to know what's out there, but you need to be aware, and look around and stuff like that. Cause a lot of the time you're going to see the same things, but every now and then, depending on where you are and what type of thing interests you, you might see that there's actually a different stack that's out there. But yeah, it's hard because I find giving advice for people on like how to start their careers, just like, I don't want to be specific, because like, and I don't want to say like this is what I did, because just because it worked for me doesn't mean it was at all the right thing, because especially for me, I've been all over the place doing so many different things. So like, finding what other people have done, talk to as many people as you can, and just try and build, like, get a general idea of things that have worked and other stuff. But yeah, I find it really hard to give advice on that front. But obviously, I like helping people through it, but it's a really hard thing to be able to like, this is the right thing to say or do or whatever. Like, I don't
Especially
know.
now, right? Every second technology changes. Every
Ugh,
second
yeah.
the responsibility changes. New rules are coming out. Like the very recent rule that really hyped me was called developer relation managers,
Hmm.
where they're doing a content creation and a bit of coding, and they're like basically evangelizing the open source codes, right?
Yep. That's my fallback right now. I figure if everything falls apart in what I'm doing, I have a pretty good resume to be a dev rel.
You're right, and it's becoming
Yeah.
very popular, very very
Yeah.
popular, and especially like in Web3 oriented projects with
Hmm.
crypto stuff, where everyone is creating a new blockchain, new SDKs, something new, and everyone is looking for like a DevRel who can simply, understandably, like explain things to people. So it's very interesting, and I believe like one of the cornerstones of founders of this type of hype technologies is you and other YouTubers who started to create a content about the technology, because it wasn't a popular thing back in the time, right?
Yep. I do think that people do need to be careful with that though, when it comes to like, and you'll see it in like Reddit and other things sometimes, where like something will be popular on YouTube and then like a junior person will come on and ask something about it, and they're just like, oh, that's just all the YouTubers talking about it, don't pay attention to it. Because it's just like, that's the hot new thing or whatever. Like, I remember when Dino first came out, and like, I had a few people that were making videos, I knew some people making videos on it, and like any content that talked about it would just explode. Like, it was such a hot topic, and that means, but because the content on it would do well, then you're going to make more content on it, and then the other guy is going to make content on it, and then it just became this like wheel that was spinning and growing and growing and growing. And then I mean, it's still there, but it definitely, it got a lot of hype for something that's still relatively niche compared to some other things. So, and you see that with a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Are there any YouTubers besides your channel, of course, that you will suggest people who just started their development career to definitely go there and look into it, or books that like must read for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is a book that I'd recommend, but I can't remember the name of it right now. I'm gonna look really quickly. If it's for CSS specifically, I'm gonna find it. For YouTube channels, it depends on, I guess, the type of content that people like, and the way they like to learn. I'd say if people like my type of content and my way of explaining things, there's a channel. Actually, it's getting up to a decent size now, but it's Dave Gray is the guy's name, and I think he just uses his name for his channel. He goes more into like React and Next.js and things like that, but he comes from a university background and stuff. He teaches part time at a university, and really good way of explaining things. And I appreciate his content because he, a little bit like me, like the videos might be a bit longer, but he explains why and how it's working, and not just these are the steps that you want to do. Um, there's Kyle at Web Dev Simplified. I know some people really like his sub content, some people uh, not so much, but I think he does a good job of just, his is a bit different from mine in that I know his approach is like, I want to keep it relatively short. So like, I mean, he'll have longer videos, but it's about like not over inundating with information. It's just like, here's this thing, how it works, you can use it now, type of thing. Um, who else is there? Coder is another good channel for beginners, by Jess. She breaks things down, but again, beginner friendly HTML, CSS type content. She doesn't have a ton of content recently because she's been working on a big project, but a lot of her content's really good for beginners. I'm forgetting other ones. I apologize for anyone that I haven't mentioned.
What about the books? Did you
Yeah,
look up
I
one?
think um, it's called CSS, the definitive guide. It's I don't remember what version it's in now, but it's multiple versions in. It's Eric Meyer. So, and if anyone knows, like the original CSS reset was Eric's.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they put out it was Eric along with I'm forgetting the there's a woman that worked with him on it too, and she does most of a lot of the MDM pages that you read. She's the author of them.
Una Kravitz?
Um, no, I'm trying this. I keep
Una
doing the
was
link,
working at Google.
and I think where did she get hired now? I can't remember where she got hired. Estelle Whale. I forget. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but Estelle. So like most people don't know of Estelle. I've talked with her once. I'm supposed to do an interview with her. So I'll get back in touch with her. But she works. Um, the company she works for actually does, and she specifically does a lot of the writing for MDM. So if you've gone on MDM and read anything to get help, chances are you've read work from her. So yeah, CSS, the definitive guide, and it just came out last year. So the newest version just came out last year, so it is up to date. Because that's always the problem with
Wow.
books.
Yeah.
There's also CSS in depth, which is by Keith J. Grant. He knows. So I haven't read that one, but he knows his way around CSS. So I would trust that it is very good. But yeah, I'm not a big book person. Um, just because I know some people prefer it because it's easy to like reference back and forth and other things, but I do prefer reading. It's funny, I make videos, but if I'm learning something new, I prefer to read. But I tend to look for blogs. And actually, I mean, speaking there's from people I've learned a lot from as well. There, I mentioned him earlier, was Andy Bell. He has a website called good luck finding it. Look up his name, Andy Bell, and just put Andy Bell CSS or something. But he has a website called Piccalilli, and so that cites just educational articles and stuff. And he has a course coming out on CSS as well soon. And I've learned a ton from Andy. He's a really smart guy. He has his own agency and does a lot of work. And I've learned a lot. I've talked about him on my channel sometimes. I interviewed him a few years ago as well. So that's a good one.
Very nice. Too much. I mean, I already got a full list of new things that I would definitely need to take a look. I didn't know about Clerk. I've always like writing down everything from scratch. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
and Astro also. I never heard about Astro.
Astro is my favorite way to make websites now. It's amazing. It started off just as a static site generator, basically, when the first version of it came out. But what I really liked about it is as a teacher, because I used to use there's a couple of other static site generators I used, and the problem was always you had the generator and then you had the language for the templating, and it was always two separate. Like the generator would use some pre-exist like Liquid or something else, like or Nunjux or whatever. So you were learning sort of two things at once, and then is this something that's part of the static site generator, or is it something that's coming from the templating language? Astro just it's if you're used to component based stuff, it just feels it works sort of like that, but by default it's a static that it generates. So you just create like a header, or not, maybe that's not the best example, but like a navigation component, and then you just put it in, and then it just works, and it feels like this natural next step after HTML, where you just get the templating. So for that, I really liked it. But then like the newest releases have added a lot of stuff. They have server side rendering now. There's a lot going on with Astro. It's really really cool, and you can bring it. It's also good because you can bring in any of the JavaScript frameworks into it if you need them. So if you need reactivity and stuff, you can bring in React, Vue. They call them like islands, and it's all with like partial hydration and stuff. It's really really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
New things to learn. The thing is that like most of the current frameworks and libraries, they're so similar and common. Like You have Svelte, you have Next, you have React, you have Astro, you have what else? A bunch of others, small
Yeah,
startups.
there's some. Yep, there's a
Yeah,
lot.
and
Yeah,
most of them are doing pretty much the same thing, but a bit different.
yeah. The creator of Svelte, I think, said it best, where he said these days picking a framework is sort of it's about choosing the vibe that you like,
Yeah.
right? That's,
Like when Next.js announced that they're like building their own Rust-based compilator, it
yep.
was like, oh wow, that will be cool, etc., etc. But it's still in beta and it's not working properly. And you're like, oh shit, why am I creating these 3, 4 projects on Next to hoping that it will be run by Rust, but initially it's just a Webpack.
Yeah. And that's one of those things. I have a few friends who are doing content with Next. I know someone who did a course, and even with Svelte, I had a friend who made a Svelte kit course at one point. And then, like, I think it was a week after they released their course, then like the new version comes out, and you're just like, oh, it all goes. And like with some of them, it's not so bad, but I know like Next, it's just like the amount of breaking changes that go on. You're just like, I'm happy I get to talk about CSS because it's
Yeah.
iterative, it builds on top, but the old stuff's still relevant.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
have to worry about that. I'm happy.
yeah, and you can easily mix everything up. Like you can mix the old version of declaring box model methods with the new ones.
Hmm.
You can write down margin top and you can write down margin in line, and it will work
Yep.
perfectly.
Yep.
Where instead in Next.js, you have to like drop everything into the trash and start again.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And it's very time consuming. And it causes originally a burnout or a technical debt, which causes you to hate your job.
Yeah. Maybe that's one of the reasons I've been able to avoid burnout a little bit. I haven't had to stress out about that so much.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I'm telling you, as soon as I started to do like I started uh, doing by just UI development. Then I like added JavaScript on top. Then I've added React.js on top. Then I've added Node.js. Then at some point I've added also the blockchain development. And then while you're working in startup culture more than 3, 4 years, you initially becoming a full stack dev. You have
Yep.
no other choice most of the time. And the stress level, like comparing the time when I was just doing like a front end development and now when I'm doing a full stack development is massive, massive one. Sometimes
Hmm.
I was like, "Oh God, please, I can't do this anymore." And you're starting to write down very weird comments on Git commits, right? Just please help me or something like that. Well, well, it's very great to talk with you, Kevin. I don't want to take more of your time. I know that like this is the first day when you don't have any noise around you, as far as I understood. So
Yeah.
I want you to go there and join this silent piss with your family. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your videos once again. They're super helpful. And yeah, I wish you a very good day.
Oh, thank you. You too. Thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for supporting me.
Oh,
That
of
was
course,
like
definitely.